On September 16, 1963, on Sunday, Victor Charles was hospitalized in Hollywood and was suffering from bronchial pneumonia. He was assessed to be in fair condition after all of the excitement from being a nominee at the 35th Academy Awards and working with Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin. He must have physically collapsed from all the excitement in that short time period. 3 days later, on September 19, 1963, Victor Charles and his agent, Jerry Rosen, were going into business with one another. Apparently, they had organized a film company and they were going to launch their first motion picture comedy titled Barnaby Appleby and the Princess. He, of course, was cast in the lead role of the film. Their business adventure and motion picture sadly never happened for Victor Charles. I've looked carefully for the reasons why they didn't produce the film, and I couldn't find any evidence about their promising film company. But I do believe it was directly pointed at the debacle motion picture, The Strangler, that helped to bring it down to a final end. On October 1st, 1963, Victor Charles was being criticized in newspapers throughout America about his disappointing film, The Strangler. Many journalists wrote about the nudity and the murdering of young women in the film. He commented, "I don't think we have to add anything else in the way of shock. The audience will be shocked enough without dwelling on the attire at the time I kill." The reviewers usually also pointed out his weight condition, and he always gave his witty defense in saying, "But I won't change my silhouette. The only style of clothing that fits my physique is a toga. It conceals, it lies. My tailor is coming up from San Diego to survey me for 3 suits. My dinner jacket was getting frayed, so I called him up and told him to cut up a few tenths and make me a new one." When critics questioned him how his career was going, he often said something like this: "I've done about 40 television shows. They have prepared me for the longer, more arduous motion picture roles. I've worked with some fine actors and learned some nasty little scene-grabbing tricks from them. I feel this is a business where individuality is paramount." As we can clearly see, many reviewers can be very nasty to Victor Charles and about his weight, and it would sadly follow him with this type of abuse throughout his career. On November 21st, 1963, there was another dream that never came true, being the project of director Robert Aldrich and Victor Charles assembling a television program series titled Mr. Man. In this production, Victor Charles would be playing the lead role as Mr. Man. This business venture was another stunning clue that something horribly had happened to Victor Charles's acting career. In 1963, it was a very kind year to Victor Charles in forging him into being a credible motion picture actor. Director Robert Aldrich takes most of the credit by casting Bette Davis and Joan Crawford in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. If Aldrich had cast lesser actresses lacking star power, Victor Charles most likely wouldn't have received an Academy Award nominee for Best Supporting Actor. Robert Aldrich didn't just stop there in 1963 with Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, but he moved quickly into directing Four for Texas. And once again, he cast two of the most popular motion pictures actors in the movie business, Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin. Victor Charles once again was sandwiched between two legendary actors who would help to print his name into Hollywood history. Victor Charles, unfortunately, didn't get rave reviews from his performance in Four for Texas, and neither did the motion picture Two. It was a fair film production, but not a blockbuster like Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. This may have been part of the reasons why Barnaby Appleby and the Princess and Mr. Man never happened, because their investors were probably running away for fear of losing all of their money. The gears that move Hollywood is all about money. In looking back at 1963, it was Victor Charles's greatest accomplishment, and he never matched it ever again. Victor Charles performed in the motion picture The Strangler, and he was the lead actor playing in the role of Leo Kroll. It was released on April 8, 1964, and the producer was Samuel Bischoff. It is my opinion that after Victor Charles was in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, and he was then jumping into The Strangler, it was an enormous embarrassment to many, and especially after receiving an Academy Award nomination. He was standing on a mountain peak with Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. But when The Strangler came into theaters throughout America, he had jumped into a deep and dark abyss. On April 20th, 1964, in the Star Tribune newspaper, written by Will Jones, it printed, "Buono is big, fat menace. Victor Buono, the fat mama's boy of Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, now has himself the role of a fat mama's boy in The Strangler. Only this time it is his show, with no big-name stars like Bette Davis and Joan Crawford to grab all the attention. Buono is the strangler of the title. The town is suddenly full of films about sex nuts, and Buono is the softest, fattest, and goofiest of the lot. The Strangler does not pretend to be a funny picture, yet to take it seriously is to destroy its essential charm. It was obviously designed to let this newest Hollywood discovery, a mountainous blob of method cholesterol, perform an exercise in quivering, sweaty, mincing fatness. The Strangler's big hang-up is that he gets all the jollies from strangling pretty girls with their own stockings. He always takes a toy doll along. Unlike less sophisticated movie monsters of the past, however, he's not inclined to leave the toy doll at the scene. Instead, he takes it home with him and undresses it and throws it into a drawer, which is full of undressed dolls. Needless to say, The Strangler wasn't going to be nominated by the Academy Award for Best Picture of the Year. I wish I knew who got the stupid idea that this motion picture vehicle would carry my Uncle Victor Charles on to more success. Did Victor Charles argue with his agent Jerry Rosen to be in that despicable film only so he could have the leading role? Or did Jerry Rosen talk him into doing the film The Strangler? We'll never know why or who made the tragic decision for Victor Charles to play the leading role of a murderer of young women in The Strangler. The momentum he had after Whatever Happened to Baby Jane and for Texas suddenly came to a sluggish halt. I don't believe Victor Charles ever played a murder while acting at the Old Globe Theater in San Diego, California. He and his agent Jerry Rosen should have known better not to put him in such a vulnerable position of being a murder monster. He was well known at the Old Globe Theater for his fine comedic and classical performances, but unfortunately, the Strangler typecast Victor Charles for the rest of his career. He spent the rest of his life trying to erase the image he made in that inferior motion picture. The horrific damage made to Victor Charles's character didn't end there, and he was in the Akron Beacon Journal newspaper in Akron, Ohio on April 23, 1964, written by Dick Shippey, and it printed, "Caught but not in time. Should the Boston Strangler, when he's nailed, turn out to be tall, slender, and handsome, it could put a crimp in what might be a busy career for Victor Buono." Being fat, funny-looking, as described in The Strangler, and sinister in manner, Victor now seems to be getting the sort of roles once given to Lord Krieger. You know, things like Jack the Ripper Returns, the son of Jack the Ripper. It's not that Buono is such a satisfying menace in terms of acting. Oh no, he only looks the part. If Victor had contributed more than looking the part, The Strangler might have been something better than the low-grade chiller it is. Not a great deal better, because The Strangler is pretty silly stuff in terms of plot and character motivation. But at least The Strangler wouldn't have all of the menacing force of a spooky cigar store Indian. My Uncle Victor Charles always had William Shakespeare and his plays deep in his heart. I've always believed he paid a high price for going up to Hollywood. The money was up there in Hollywood, but William Shakespeare's words were at the Old Globe Theater in Balboa Park, San Diego. His dear friend, actor Jonathan McMurtry, kept working at the Old Globe Theater for nearly 50 years, and he performed in every Shakespearean play that was ever written. But who was enriched the most by the productions they acted in, it certainly goes to Jonathan McMurtry. There are some things in life that cannot buy happiness from making money, because you have to follow your heart. Victor Charles was in the television program Perry Mason on April 2, 1964, titled The Case of the Simple Simon. His role was John Sylvester Fawcett, and the executive producer was Gail Patrick Jackson. In the local newspaper in my hometown El Cajon, California, in April 1964, it printed, "Actor Victor Buono, whose home is in Encino, spent several days last week in El Cajon as the house guest of his brother and wife, Mr. and Mrs. Wayne Erreca, and watched his nephew, Wayne, play ball with the Yankees in the Western Little League. Mr. Buono's latest film is The Strangler, and played recently on The Perry Mason Show. He also spent some time visiting his grandmother, Mrs. Myrtle Keller, recuperating from a broken leg." I remember looking out of the dugout during my baseball game, and I saw my Uncle Victor Charles sitting on the third row of the bleachers, and there were many people swirling around him. I think the fans saw more of him than they did the game. I can't remember which team won, but Victor Charles was the clear winner of the day. During 1964, my Uncle David Francis Buono came to live with us for a short period of time. I believe it was due to their relocation to Encino, California, that created troublesome issues for him, and he most likely had difficulties adjusting, leaving his girlfriend and his friends back in San Diego. David Francis was 17 years old, and I was 11 years old, and I loved having him share my bedroom with me. Even though he was my uncle, I considered him more like a brother. It was a wonderful time then, but when he did finally have to leave and return to Encino, I was completely crushed because my favorite brother had gone away. On June 24, 1964, Victor Charles was again on the silver screen with Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., and Bing Crosby in the motion picture Robin and the Seven Hoods. He played the role of Deputy Sheriff Alvin Potts, and the producer was none other than Frank Sinatra. One thing that Frank Sinatra hated more than anything else is being called a loser. The critics were rather sour on Robin and the Seven Hoods and described it as being rather cheesy and dated, especially with Bing Crosby's performance in it. He had Dean Martin and Victor Buono in his last motion picture, for Texas, and it didn't help any having Victor Charles's The Strangler being a huge loser. Take notice of the small print Victor Charles received in a newspaper review saying only, "Victor Buono as a cop." Those 4 words were the only print that they gave him in his performance of Robin and the Seven Hoods. The days of being congratulated as being nominated by the Academy Awards for Best Supporting Actor in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane was now long gone, and he would never be in another motion picture with Frank Sinatra ever again. I wish I could have been a fly on the wall when Frank Sinatra was talking about Victor Charles's debacle of The Strangler. Whatever relationship they once had, it definitely now was over for good, for the rest of his entire career in Hollywood. During 1964, it was his least productive year since coming to Hollywood in 1960. He was only in one television program that year, and it was Perry Mason. Did Victor Charles's agent, Jerry Rosen, have difficulties finding other roles for him because of the bad publicity from the disastrous motion picture, The Strangler? On December 15, 1964, Victor Charles desperately needed a winning rebound after his following Grace in Hollywood. And finally, a breath of air of good luck came his way in the motion picture Hush, Hush, Sweet Charlotte, directed by Robert Aldrich, and Victor Charles was once again playing in the small role as Betty Davis's father, Sam Hollis. On July 12, 1964, the newspaper printed, "Buono again with Crawford and Davis." Eventually, though, Joan Crawford dropped out of the film. On July 23, 1964, Victor Charles shared a few of his words in writer Vernon Scott's article covering the motion picture of Hush, Hush, Sweet Charlotte, saying, "I've started on television when I was 18 years old, and I've specialized in playing old men. In this picture I play Bet's father. People don't think of my private life, but you'd be surprised how difficult it was for me to get a date with a girl my own age. They've seen me play these older roles and take me for a dirty old man. I resent that, but I don't resent the kidding and jokes about my size and weight. I guess I'm the only actor in the business who can play Falstaff without padding. My weight doesn't bother me physically, and my doctor tells me my heart is in perfect condition. My feet get a little tired now and again, but I try to keep my weight as steady as possible. I lost 80 pounds recently because I was getting too heavy. My tailor took in my clothes, but nobody else even noticed. On anyone else, the change would have been dramatic. On me, it didn't show. At the end of 1964, it would take a number of years for Victor Charles to shake off the bad, tainted memories of the Strangler. It had crippled him and made it more difficult for him to be cast in any future television programs and motion pictures. In Hollywood, if an actor loses their popularity, it's a sure bet they will need a miracle to survive and prosper on into the future. In 1965, he would be facing uncharted challenges after his Waterloo debacle movie, The Strangler, and he would be looking deeply inside his soul. Good news came quickly, though, on December 4th, 1964, and he was cast in the motion picture, The Greatest Story Ever Told. It was a story of Jesus Christ, and Victor Charles would be playing in the role of Zorak, the priest. He would be working with Angela Lansbury as Claudia, Jose Ferrer as Herod Antipas, and Ed Wynn as Old Aram, and many other celebrated actors and actresses. The director was legendary George Stevens, and the motion picture was released in February of 1965. Heavenly intervention must have saved Victor Charles from dropping into the abyss where all Hollywood box office poisoned actors go to cry and melt away. It wasn't going to be just an average year, but it turned out to be a fantastic year for him. The newspapers were printing something like this: Victor Buono is fabulous in Tartuffe, in his new stage production of Moliere's play Tartuffe at the Commedia Theater in Palo Alto, California. Victor Charles turned back to the theater stage for comfort. On March 28, 1965, Victor Charles was attending a high school drama festival at the Valley College in Van Nuys, California, with many other actors and actresses and writers. He was one of the judges that year, and it must have enlightened him all the more. Victor Charles began reaching out to the public in 1965, after the debacle of The Strangler. Not just for money, but he wanted to see their eyes and hear their laughter. On May 23, 1965, Victor Charles was performing in his one-man show of remembrance of things past at the Le Grand Theater. It was produced by his agent, Jerry Rosen, and his show included the classic works of writers of Thurber, Dylan Thomas, Yeats, Shakespeare, and many more for him to recite to his waiting audiences. On May 25, 1965, my mother Hilda went to see and hear Victor Charles's solo performance of Remembrance of Things Past at the Hollywood Le Grand Theater, and she later wrote this letter to him, saying, "Dear Victor, I'm writing to thank you again for the wonderful dinner, and the chance to see your performance. Although you told the audience not to go away with any message, I felt strongly that I knew you better, not only as an actor, but as a brother-in-law. I find it hard to express my innermost feelings with anyone, and especially with anyone of Lou's family. I don't understand the constant inconsistencies which you all seem to possess concerning family, friends, major issues, etc. I find it difficult to communicate with you all. That's why I hope I can convey my thoughts to you so that you know they are sincere. Listening to you the other night, I was sensitive to how much of yourself was involved in the dialogue. I must tell you, I never know when you are yourself or when you're on. Also, and this is the main reason for the letter, I noted the one consistent thing about you, which I have observed in your public appearances, your sense of morality, whether genuine or you select image builder. I feel it's genuine. It's something I must tell you I admire greatly. Since you are exposed to so many people, your ideas can carry influence. Your youth and accomplishments can inspire many, as I'm sure they do. To choose the standards you have is a tribute to you. In a world where personal individualism is hard to attain, I hope you are able to grow in your convictions and become an instrument of conscience in our society. I'm not calling you a saint. There are many things about you I don't understand or agree with, but you have a gift that can be used for good and bad, and I feel you're trying for the good guys. Thanks again for a universally entertaining show. Although you are Catholic and I am Methodist, maybe our mutual God bless you. Your sister-in-law, Hilda. When Victor Charles received my mother Hilda's May 25th letter, it took him a short while to respond, and he did on June 10th, 1965, saying, "Dear Hilda, I have not answered your letter simply because I did not know what to say. To try and put on paper the thoughts which entered my mind after reading your note would only embarrass both of us, and anyway it would end up sounding like an old 'can you top this' script. All I can and shall say is that I have hoped for closer contact with you for the past 15 years. For the reasons you mentioned, and others equally as important and unimportant, we have never really gotten together. I have deeply missed knowing you, and for lack of space to list the reasons, let me simply say that it was because you have a glittering sense of humor. I base all friendships on that sense, and come to think of it, I lose a lot of contacts for that reason. But I'm drifting. I suppose I can sum it all up by saying, thank you. Better late than never. And I pray that this is a start of friendship between us, with the great big six-pack of love, respect, and gratitude. I remain your insane, inane, implausible in-law. P.S. When considering what I say and do, a good rule of the thumb is, when in doubt, laugh. He's probably just performing. The communication between Victor Charles and my mother Hilda is an honest showing of the lack of their dialogue over the years, and it also reveals the same lack within our family members. When I lived with my Uncle Victor Charles, he was often quiet and very thoughtful. And when I was growing up with my mother Hilda, she hardly shared any of her deep feelings with me as well. Victor Charles and my mother were very intelligent, thoughtful, and kind, but both held back their inner feelings and they held their private thoughts from others. Father John R. Hayhern heard of Victor Charles as reciting the words of William Shakespeare, Yeats, and Dylan Thomas to excited audiences throughout America. And he probably looked up into the sky and said, "Thank you, Lord. I knew one day Victor would help your children." After going through hell and criticism of the Strangler, I know my Uncle Victor Charles spent many nights searching deeply in his heart and soul of how he could turn those horrible days around when he feared he lost everything he had already built in his early years. I too believe Agent Jerry Rosen helped him through those dark and struggling days of moving forward and showing empathy to audiences and making him all the more human to them. When looking back over Victor Charles's acting career, the biggest creative crime had to be screenwriters writing mostly buffoonery for his motion picture roles. Why Hollywood refused to cast Victor Charles in leading roles in classic historic films and playing figures such as Henry VIII, King of England, or in quality William Shakespeare plays like director Franco Zeffirelli's motion picture Romeo and Juliet, 1968. And it's anyone's guess why they didn't. When Victor Charles was given a juicy and classic character role to play in a stage production, he dominated the audience's imaginations with his physical poise and facial expressions, and with his lightning and amusing wit. What a pity Hollywood would overlook such a great talented actor as Victor Charles. In mid-1996, my father, Sonny, and my mother Hilda were having difficulties in their 15-year marriage. My father had recently stopped being a San Diego narcotic detective, and he went into steel business with his friend Jack Sinelli. I was 12 years old then, and fresh out of the 6th grade at Johnson Avenue Elementary School in El Cajon, California. The decision that my parents soon made lifted me out of my childhood for good. They made an arrangement with my Uncle Victor Charles and my Grandma Mert to take me into their Encino home for a while so they could iron out their troubling marriage. My new home was now at 4626 Avenue, Encino, California. It was my Uncle Victor Charles's home, and I was now living with him, my Grandma Mert, and my Uncle David Francis, who was 18 years old then. I never had a dog growing up in El Cajon, but I had one now, and he was a German Shepherd named Sergeant. Outside the house was a long trailer that was parked in the far corner on the property, and that was where Sherman lived. He was an old black man in his 60s, and he was their housekeeper, doing odd jobs inside and out of the house and property. I loved him, and he always had a smile for me and had a warm tone in his voice comforting me. I loved that man very much, and Sherman loved me. When approaching the house leading up the curving roadway with high hedges on both sides like a tunnel, and nearing the top of the hillside and turning left, there was Victor Charles's beautiful home on the hill. It was grand, and it looked like a small castle made out of stones, with two garage doors to the left and a rock stairway leading up to the front door to the right. When standing at the top and looking to the left, there was an entrance door to where David Francis and my bedroom was, and it was right next to the laundry room and kitchen. When opening the front door and entering to the right, there was a spacious living room that had a large piano in the corner, and near the den there was a small organ against the wall that my granny grunts often played on. Everyone spent a lot of time enjoying in the den that had a wooden bar and a comfortable sofa where many discussions took place throughout the day. When standing in the foyer as you entered the house and you walked to your left down a long hallway, the first door you reached was my Grandma Mert's bedroom, and going a little further you would see Victor Charles's master bedroom. Throughout the entire interior was exotic woods from various foreign countries, and it was built by two Scandinavian builders who had constructed all of the high wooden ceilings, walls, and its floors throughout the house. The kitchen was located in between David Francis and my bedroom and the other two bedrooms down the hallway. We spent many hours throughout the day in the kitchen. Grandma Mert was a fabulous cook and kept everything clean, while Granny Grant sat in a corner talking her ears off throughout the day. Grandma Mert made practically everything from scratch, and she had a secret recipe of white bread that she probably got from heaven. After spreading butter on her delicious slice of bread, it was like eating a New York sirloin steak. The loaf was heavy and very dense, and I've never eaten better bread in my entire life. If you like eating French fries like I do, once again, never have I eaten better French fries than my Grandma Mert's. Almost everywhere you go to eat French fries these days, they are small and skinny. Grandma Mert would take one potato and cut it in 6 long lengths, making them fat and long, and then toss them into the frying pan. When they were perfectly cooked, she pulled them out and dropped them onto our plates, and then we bathed them with ketchup, and we took our fork and knife, and then we were in French fries heaven with our first bites. One of my favorite meals Grandma Mert made was her fried chicken dinners. Whatever it was that she put in her breaded, spiced fried chicken was out of this world. This was back in the old days when cooking was an art. There weren't any tin can dinners for us because Grandma Mert cooked everything fresh from scratch. There was no refrigerator TV dinners, canned vegetables, and fruits, and how wonderful were her breakfasts of bacon sausages and bright yellow-colored egg yolks served with her delicious mashed potato cakes in the morning. I don't recall ever watching television in the Encino house. In fact, I can't recall ever seeing a single television set throughout the house, not in the den, bedrooms, living room, or kitchen. What we did do for entertainment each day was talking with one another. For a short time, Granny Groots was staying with us. She was blind then, and she lost her husband Pete Baltovich when he died on March of 1964. Now, if you ask me how I got to calling her Granny Grunts, I haven't a single clue. She was just my Granny Grunts, and to this day I feel privileged having known her. She was the very first person who taught Victor Charles how to become an actor. Granny Grunts was 78 years old in 1965, and she played her organ in the living room and sang her songs. Wherever we were in the house, she would sit with us, and she threw her 2 cents worth in every conversation and argument we had. The one thing we had in the Buono family was strong-minded women. Granny Grunts had 3 daughters, Annie Susie Brittenbach, Grandma Mert Buono, and Aunt Mary Jane Morris. My mother Hilda came from an ultra-polite family, the Goldens, who never cursed or spoke out loudly to one another. And whenever my mother visited with these 4 strong-minded women, she always felt like hiding under a turtle shell. My Uncle David, Francis, was 18 years old in 1965, and he had a bronze-colored 1964 Javale, a car, and we drove it down to Long Beach, California, to pick up Uncle Tony after he'd flown in a seaplane from Catalina Island. He was 23 years old, and he was working as a bartender at one of the popular bars on the island. It was always fun being around Uncle Tony. Just a year or so before, he had traveled to Spain and a few other European countries while traveling by buses and trains. I admired his free-wheeling swagger, and in my later years, I too traveled just like him, on buses and trains seeing the world. I loved sharing the bedroom with Uncle David Francis. I never had a brother before, but our relationship was just as close as that. We went everywhere together. He was 18 and I was 12, and I was treated like a little man. It was during that span of time when living in the Encino house when my childhood came to an end. We both started working at the Domingo's Italian Delicatessen on Ventura Boulevard in Encino, California. They were a true Italian family, something like you would see in an Italian motion picture in Bronx, New York. There was Papa Domingo, Mama Domingo, and their 20-year-old son, and what a wonderful atmosphere I had when working there. David Francis and I would be working behind the counter taking food orders from customers and cutting cheeses, sausages, and salami. When breathing in my nostrils of the wonderful smells of all the food and spices, I felt like I was in an Italian paradise. I had recently watched the motion picture Mary Poppins starring Julie Andrews and Dick Van Dyke. On one ordinary day, I was standing behind the counter when I heard a voice wanting to make an order, and I looked up and saw in the eyes of actor Dick Van Dyke. And he was standing there without any makeup or wearing a costume, and stupid little me thought to myself that I was actually taking an order from a Hollywood star. My friends back in El Cajon wouldn't ever have believed what just happened to me on that day. I soon found out he was one of our neighbors, and I was told that actor John Wayne also was living only a short distance away from us. We were surrounded by television and motion picture celebrities, and it took me quite a while to adjust to this reality. Soon thereafter, I realized that I was living with a Hollywood star, my Uncle Victor Charles. It soon became normal seeing celebrities sitting outside the Domingo's Italian Delicatessen under their umbrella tables when seeing actor Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. of 77 Sunset Strip, drinking coffee, chatting, and laughing with his celebrity friends. It was a common event, but when living in El Cajon, California as a young boy, I never experienced what I was now seeing and hearing. With every day while living in my new life, the memories of El Cajon were steadily fading away. My Uncle David Francis was attending at Los Angeles Pierce College, and I was going to Castell Portola Junior High School at 18720 Lynette Street, Tarzana, California in 1965. Being in the company of my Grandma Merritt, Victor Charles, David Francis, and Uncle Tony was liberating because I was living in an adult atmosphere where no babies were ever allowed to be seen or heard. David Francis and I would take a drive out into the desert, and he taught me how to shoot tin cans from a distance using a .22 caliber rifle, and it was just like his father Victor Francis once did with him as a young boy. I was never treated like a little boy in Encino, but I was treated like a man, something that I never felt when living with my parents in El Cajon. Once in a while, David Francis and I would pick up some cold cans of beer and hot pizza, and we drove up on the top of a hillside overlooking San Fernando Valley, eating and drinking, and we were feeling completely free and happy in those wonderful days together. He was 18, and I was nearly 13, and we were united brothers. Victor Charles was extremely busy during 1965 by performing in television programs, motion pictures, and acting on theater stages. When he was at home, he was usually quiet and charging up his batteries, and I would tippy-toe by him in the den when he stretched out on the comfortable sofa memorizing one of his new scripts. On May 24, 1965, Victor Charles was at the Oak Globe Theater in San Diego, California. He was performing solo in remembrance of things past. I remember sitting at the Encino kitchen table with Victor Charles for lunch, and I believe it was director Robert Aldridge or some other director was sitting on my left. We were eating steak, and the director showed me how Europeans held their silverware when eating. He held his fork in his left hand and his knife in his right, and to this very day I eat exactly that same way how he taught me that day. Our German Shepherd dog, Sergeant, was my best buddy when David Francis wasn't at home. And I would take him outside onto the lawn, and I would wrestle with him, and pretending I was a Christian slave who was tossed into the Roman arena, and Sergeant was a vicious, hungry lion wanting to eat me up. We would roll over and over, and he would take little soft bites on my arms and hands, but he never hurt me, because he must have known it was just all in good fun. I remember when the son of Mr. Domingo took me to the Staples Center Stadium to watch the Los Angeles Kings hockey team play that night. We had a grand time, and to this very day I have fond memories of how nice he was to me. Each day I grew more mature and confident, and every new day was a new, unique revelation to me. In the evenings, Grandma Mert would sit up in bed and crochet colored hats for Victor Charles. It became a habit for him when he appeared on the Johnny Carson late night show, bringing his brand new crocheted, multicolored hats that she made for him. When she crocheted, she always had a Lucky Strike cigarette between her lips. She was a big smoker, and I was always amazed of how she could keep the thick stream of smoke from getting into her eyes. This was a special time when being with my grandmother Mert, and she always had an answer for every question that I asked of her. One of my favorite memories being alone with my grandma Mert was when I was sitting at the kitchen table and she was washing dishes, and I asked her if she had any stories of her first husband, my grandfather Louis Rupert Erreca, who died at 37 years old in the first 2 weeks of the beginning of World War II. She stopped washing the dishes and just stood there quietly for a moment, and she softly said, "I often looked out this kitchen window thinking your grandfather would just pop up and surprise me with a big laugh. He was a prankster, all right. He always kept me laughing." Victor Charles was in the motion picture Young Dillinger in November 1964, and it was a short time after The Strangler. It was filmed within 17 days by Goldwyn Studios. It starred Nick Adams, Robert Conrad, Mary Ann Mobley, and Victor Buono, and it was released on May 9th, 1965. The film started getting harsh criticism by the reviewers in newspapers throughout America. Their condemning reviews were a reminder to Victor Charles's poisonous The Strangler, resting in the many minds of fans who remembered his biggest debacle in his young career. Being in Young Dillinger didn't raise his Hollywood star a single inch up the ladder of success, but instead, it was an inch lower down on the Hollywood ladder. On September 5th, 1965, Victor Charles was in a newspaper article reminding him about his severe weight problems, and these are a few of his words he said in defense once again. "Williams are fat, and since I'm a super villain, I guess I'll have to be super fat." Victor Charles was soon in another newspaper reviewing Dean Martin's motion picture The Silencers, where he plays the role of a villain leader of the organization of O. He was asked of what type of story it was, comedy or thriller. Victor Charles responded, "Oh no, we play it slightly tongue-in-cheek, but we also play it straight. It's as serious as Hamlet. We may have a few scenes of Hamlet with his trousers down, but it's still Hamlet." My father Sonny brought my sister Renee to the Encino house, and Victor Charles took us to the studio where they were shooting The Silencers. The scene we were watching was also in the tunnel cavern. They had golf carts that the guards drove, and the scene we saw was the mounted X-ray cannon attached to the phony rock ceiling in the cavern. The X-ray cannon barrel had a long transparent plastic tube that would be flashing red lights and making funny noises. On the ground was big and small chunks of phony broken rocks. Dean Martin was in the far background on the set, and there was a high jetty of broken rocks that he hid behind at the beginning of the shoot. When the scene began, we saw Dean Martin crawling down over the jetty rocks with the X-ray cannon flashing red lights and spewing steam out of its barrel. Dean Martin dodged and stopped, hesitated, and ran to a large broken rock and hid behind it. The X-ray cannon was aimed directly at where he was hiding behind it, and as the right lights, steam, and funny audio sound was heard, the large rock started slowly deflating, as if it was being melted by the X-ray cannon. It was spewing thick, molten, colored red liquid flowing down the large rock. When we closely looked at the melting large rock, it was made out of some kind of carpet material. When witnessing this scene in person, it looked completely unrealistic. But that is what Hollywood is all about, because they can make something unreal look completely real when filming through the lens of a camera, and when they have superb film editors cutting thousands of feet of camera film to make it believable. After that scene was shot, Victor Charles took us to another area within the studio where his O organization, Bunker, was in the motion picture. The entire O interior where Victor Charles played was now destroyed, with large and small broken phony rocks everywhere and with tables overturned, and the chair he sat in the film was now upside down. The scene also struck me as being very phony looking, but once again, Hollywood can always make us believe while sitting and watching on the silver screen. The gem moment was when we followed Victor Charles into Dean Martin's dressing room on the set. There he was, Dean Martin, all alone in his dressing room and still dressed in his Matt Helm costume. The dressing room wasn't very large, but big enough to allow us to be comfortable. I was sitting no further than 3 feet away from Dean Martin. And growing up, I was a big fan of him and Jerry Lewis and all of their wonderful comedic motion pictures I saw in the El Cajon Theater. When being close to your idol, it's absolutely surreal. I noticed numerous booze bottles on a corner table with short-stemmed glasses, but Dean Martin wasn't drinking that moment, and imagine that. I can't recall my sister or me ever saying or asking a single word to him because we were totally starstruck, silent by sitting this close to our legendary celebrity. Victor Charles soon performed in the television program The Wild Wild West on September 17, 1965. The producer was Michael Garrison. Apparently it was around this time of 1965 in September when Victor Charles was probably having financial problems due to not finding quality motion picture roles. And he had just performed in the cheesy B-grade motion picture Young Dillinger. On October 10, 1965, he was performing in the television program Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, in the episode of The Cyborg, and he played in the role of Tabor Ulrich. He shared a comment about his weight once again, saying, "Why, I'm possibly thin. I used to weigh 412. My weight is distressing only to my tailor and wardrobe people. I may lose another 50 pounds in the next year to make them happy." I was 13 years old on Halloween night on October 31st, 1965, when I had the great pleasure of being in my very first Hollywood party in our Encino house. Victor Charles invited around a dozen guests who were actors and actresses. I believe Ursula Andress and Barbara Perkins were there that evening. And I chummed around with actor Robert Strauss, who was nominated by the Academy Awards in 1953 for Best Supporting Actor in Stalag 17, playing in the role of Stanislaus Animal Kuzma. There was a special moment in the evening when Victor Charles and another actor were throwing witty words back and forth at each other and giving the guests laughing enjoyment with every barb that was thrown. I did get a little tipsy by drinking abandoned half-filled glasses of whiskey around the den. Naturally, someone knew how to play the piano, and it soon looked like an old motion picture of the 1930s where people are standing around it and singing along with the piano player throughout the night. During the entire time I lived with my Uncle Victor Charles, he never had any girlfriends over or any secretive, intimate men holding his hand as far as I saw or heard. If and when he never did have a sexual rendezvous with a woman or man, it definitely wasn't transparent to my young eyes and ears. He did love making people laugh with his lightning wit and amusing comedic imaginations, and he loved being in the center of attention throughout that October Halloween night in 1965. On November 11, 1965, newspapers were writing about the motion picture Paradise Road, starring Joan Blondell and Victor Charles. The title was new, but the storyline definitely wasn't. Paradise Road was the very same motion picture of Big Daddy in 1969. The owners of this production must have thought by waiting 4 years and changing its title, it would bring a better box office earning than before. In the end, it was still an absolute loser again. And a week later, on November 17, 1965, Victor Charles was seen in the Bob Hope television program titled Russian Roulette on the Chrysler Presents a Bob Hope comedy special. He also was working with Don Rickles and Jill St. John. To top off the year of 1965, Victor Charles was performing in Salt Lake City, Utah, in the stage production of Peter Pan. He played the role of Captain Hook at the Valley Music Hall. I eventually returned back to El Cajon to my chagrin sometime in early 1966 because my parents had apparently ironed out their marriage difficulties. What I took home with me was the many wonderful experiences of becoming a young man and leaving my boyish nature behind me for good. To this very day, I count myself lucky to have had a close relationship with my Uncle Victor Charles, Granny Grunts, Grandma Mert, Uncle Tony, and my uncle brother, David Francis. When returning to El Cajon after living in Encino, my mind and heart never embraced the home I once raised in as a child, and I was now constantly looking to the future when I could move elsewhere as far away from El Cajon as I could. My wish would soon come my way, sooner than later.